Auschwitz is often remembered for gas chambers, smoke rising from chimneys, and piles of bodies. But behind that machine of death stood one man who made it run with cold precision. His name was Rudolf Höss. He did not look like a monster, but the brutality he unleashed left entire communities mourning for the rest of their lives. Höss was born on November 25, 1901, in Baden-Baden, a quiet spa town in southwest Germany. His full name was Rudolf Franz Ferdinand Höss. His father had served in the German colonial army in East Africa and later ran a small business. He was a strict Catholic who believed in discipline, duty, and obedience above everything else. He wanted Rudolf to become a priest. That was the plan from the start. The house he grew up in was controlled and serious. There was no softness in it, no open talk about feelings. Höss later said that as a child, he was never allowed to question adults. If his father gave an order, it was final. He was taught that authority was sacred and that loyalty was more important than personal judgment. He was also taught to hide weakness. If he felt fear or doubt, he kept it to himself. That habit of shutting down emotion started early. When World War I broke out in August 1914, Höss was only 12 years old. Germany was filled with patriotic excitement. Young boys dreamed of glory. By 1916, when he was just 14, Höss managed to get into the army by lying about his age. Records show he served in a cavalry unit and later in the infantry. He was sent to the Ottoman front, fighting in areas that are today Iraq and Palestine. These were harsh battle zones with heat, disease, and constant danger. He saw death up close before he was even old enough to vote. Friends were killed, officers were killed. He later claimed he was wounded several times and received decorations, including the Iron Cross Second Class. By the age of 17, he had become one of the youngest non-commissioned officers in the German army. Germany collapsed in November 1918. The Kaiser abdicated. The war was lost. Soldiers came home to a country that was starving and angry. The Treaty of Versailles was signed in June 1919. Germany lost territory, had to pay heavy reparations, and was blamed for starting the war. Many veterans felt humiliated. Höss was one of them. He later said he felt betrayed by politicians. Like thousands of other former soldiers, he joined the Freikorps. These were right-wing paramilitary groups made up of veterans who hated communists and feared a Bolshevik revolution, like the one in Russia. The Freikorps were violent. They crushed uprisings in Berlin, Munich, and other cities between 1919 and 1921. They operated with extreme nationalism and deep hatred toward anyone they saw as an enemy of Germany. In 1923, Höss became involved in a murder that would define his early adult life. The victim was a schoolteacher named Walter Kadau. Kadau was suspected of betraying Albert Leo Schlatiger, a nationalist who had been executed by French forces for sabotage in the Ruhr region. Members of the nationalist circle believed Kadau had informed on Schlatiger. Höss and several others lured Kadau into a wooded area near Parchim on May 31, 1923. They beat him to death with sticks and shot him. The crime was brutal and personal. Höss was arrested soon after. In 1924, he was convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison. He served his sentence in Brandenburg prison. While inside, he spent time reading nationalist and racist literature. He connected with other right-wing inmates. Instead of reflecting on the murder, he saw himself as a loyal patriot who had acted for Germany. In 1928, after about 6 years behind bars, he was released under a general amnesty for political prisoners. He walked out into a Germany that was still unstable. The Weimar Republic was struggling. An economic crisis was coming. Political violence was normal. Many people were looking for strong leadership and simple answers. Höss had already proven he could kill for ideology. He had already shown he could obey without question. Now he needed a movement big enough to give that mindset a purpose. and he would not have to wait for long after Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany in January 1933. Within months, the Nazi Party dismantled democracy. Political opponents were arrested, trade unions were crushed. The Enabling Act gave Hitler dictatorial powers. Höss formally joined the SS in 1934. The SS, led by Heinrich Himmler, was not just a security force. It was built as an elite racial order. Himmler believed the SS represented the racial elite of the German people. Members had to prove Aryan ancestry. They were trained to believe they were superior and that their mission was historic. Höss's SS membership number was 193616. That number shows he was not one of the very first members, but he joined early enough to build a career. Himmler valued men with military backgrounds who had already shown loyalty to nationalist causes. Höss had both. In December 1934, he was assigned to the Dachau concentration camp. Dachau had opened in March 1933 near Munich. It was the first regular concentration camp established by the Nazi regime. At the beginning, it held political prisoners, including communists, social democrats, journalists, and trade union leaders. Later, it would expand to include Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexual men, and other groups. At Dachau, Höss worked under Theodor Eicke. Eicke was ruthless and organized. He created the structure that became the model for all later concentration camps. Guards were trained to show no sympathy. Prisoners were stripped of identity, given numbers, and forced into exhausting labor. Punishments were severe. Floggings, standing cells, starvation rations, and executions were part of camp life. Eicke also built a culture inside the SS where cruelty was seen as discipline. Guards were told that weakness towards prisoners was betrayal. This system shaped Höss deeply. He later admitted that Dachau was his real education in running a camp. He learned how to control large groups of prisoners through fear. He learned how paperwork and organization could support brutality. He saw hangings carried out in front of inmates to maintain terror. In 1938, Höss was transferred to Sachsenhausen concentration camp near Berlin. Sachsenhausen had opened in 1936 and was used as a training ground for SS officers. There, Höss served as adjutant and gained more responsibility in administration. He dealt with records, labor assignments, and discipline. His superiors described him as reliable and methodical. That was exactly what Himmler wanted. By 1939, Germany was preparing for war. On September 1st, 1939, German forces invaded Poland. Britain and France declared war 2 days later. World War II had begun. Within weeks, millions of Poles, including Jews and political leaders, were under German control. The SS suddenly had a massive problem. They needed camps to hold prisoners from the occupied territories. They needed men who could build and manage these camps quickly and efficiently. Himmler had been watching Höss for years. He knew Höss followed orders without debate. So on May 4th, 1940, a month after Himmler ordered the establishment of a new concentration camp near the Polish town of Auschwitz, Höss was officially appointed Commandant of Auschwitz. He was 38 years old and already shaped by 2 decades of war, prison, and camp service. At first, Auschwitz was designed to hold Polish political prisoners. On June 14, 1940, the first transport arrived with 728 Polish prisoners from Tarnów prison. They were mostly young men accused of resistance activities. They were registered, given numbers from 31 to 758, and forced into labor immediately. The camp in 1940 was small compared to what it would become. It consisted of brick barracks surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers. But expansion began almost at once. Prisoners were forced to build new blocks, dig drainage systems, and extend fences. Conditions were brutal. Food rations were extremely low, often under 1,300 calories per day. Disease spread quickly, especially typhus. Beatings were common. Public hangings were carried out to frighten others. On June 22, 1941, when Germany invaded the Soviet Union in Operation Barbarossa, millions of Jews were brought under Nazi control. At the same time, Nazi leadership moved from persecution to systematic extermination. Plans that had been discussed in private were now becoming official policy. In the summer of 1941, Höss was summoned to Berlin to meet Heinrich Himmler. During this meeting, Himmler informed him that Hitler had ordered the final solution, the plan to murder the Jews of Europe, and Auschwitz would play a central role there. Höss was to prepare the camp for large-scale killing. This meant expanding the site dramatically. Construction began on Auschwitz II, also called Birkenau, about 3 kilometers from the original camp. Birkenau would cover more than 170 hectares and would eventually hold over 300 barracks. By then, mass shootings were already taking place across Eastern Europe. Special SS killing squads, called the Einsatzgruppen, followed the German army into the Soviet Union after June 22, 1941. In places like Babi Yar near Kiev in September 1941, over 33,000 Jews were shot in just 2 days. Similar massacres happened in Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, and Ukraine. Hundreds of thousands were killed in forests and ravines. But these shootings had limits. They were slow. They required large firing squads. Ammunition had to be transported, graves had to be dug, and many SS men began to suffer mental breakdowns from shooting women and children at close range. Heinrich Himmler himself witnessed a mass shooting in Minsk in August 1941 and reportedly became sick. Nazi leadership started looking for a method that would be faster, more controlled, and less emotionally damaging for the killers. That search led to experiments with gas. At Auschwitz, the first tests with Zyklon B took place in early September 1941. The Zyklon B was a pesticide made by the German company Degesch. It released hydrogen cyanide gas when exposed to air. It had been used to kill lice in barracks and clothing. Now it was tested on people. In the basement of Block 11 at Auschwitz I, several hundred Soviet prisoners of war were locked inside sealed cells. SS men poured Zyklon B pellets into openings. Within minutes, the gas spread. The victims suffocated as the cyanide blocked oxygen in their blood. It took hours before the area was ventilated and the bodies removed. These early trials killed hundreds. Höss later admitted that once he saw how effective Zyklon B was, he knew it would replace shootings. It required fewer guards. The victims could be deceived until the last moment. From his point of view, it was efficient. He thought like a manager, not like a human being watching mass death. In early 1942, after the Wannsee Conference on January 20th, plans were formalized for the final solution. Auschwitz was redesigned for large-scale extermination. Construction began on Auschwitz II, Birkenau. The massive expansion was built on marshland about 3 kilometers from the original camp. Prisoners were forced to drain swamps and lay railway tracks that ran directly into the camp. At first, makeshift gas chambers were set up in 2 converted farmhouses known as Bunker 1 and Bunker 2. These were used in 1942 before larger facilities were completed. But Himmler wanted something permanent and capable of handling transports from across Europe. Between 1942 and 1943, 4 large crematoria, Crematoria 2, 3, 4, and 5, were constructed at Birkenau. These buildings were designed with underground dressing rooms and gas chambers. Victims were told they were going to take showers for disinfection. They were ordered to undress, stack their clothes neatly, and sometimes even remember where they placed their shoes. This was done to prevent panic and speed up the process. Once inside the gas chamber, the doors were sealed. SS men wearing gas masks dropped Zyklon B pellets through openings in the roof or through side vents. The pellets released gas when exposed to air. Death usually came within 15 to 20 minutes, though it could take longer if the chamber was overcrowded. Witnesses later described screams, pounding on doors, and people climbing on top of each other trying to breathe. After the ventilation systems cleared the gas, Sonderkommando prisoners, Jewish inmates forced to work in the crematoria, removed the bodies. Gold teeth were extracted. Hair was cut. Corpses were loaded into ovens. Each crematorium had multiple muffles or furnace openings. At full capacity, thousands of bodies could be burned per day. When the ovens could not keep up, especially in 1944, open-air pits were dug behind Crematorium 5 to burn bodies outdoors. Höss later stated that at peak capacity, up to 2,000 people could be gassed at once in the largest chambers. The entire system was built around train schedules. Deportation trains arrived from France, the Netherlands, Belgium, Greece, Italy, and other countries. Selections were done immediately on arrival ramps. Those considered unfit for labor were sent straight to the gas chambers. Höss supervised every stage. He coordinated with Adolf Eichmann's office in Berlin regarding transport numbers. He oversaw construction timelines with SS engineers like Karl Bischoff. He enforced discipline among guards. He monitored daily killing figures. Records show that in 1943 alone, hundreds of thousands were murdered at Auschwitz. But this number was nothing compared to what happened to the Hungarian Jews. By early 1944, most Jewish communities in Poland, France, the Netherlands, Belgium, and parts of the Soviet Union had already been destroyed. Millions were dead. But Hungary was different. Although Hungary had passed anti-Jewish laws in the late 1930s and early 1940s, its Jewish population was still largely alive by 1944. Around 725,000 Jews lived in Hungary at that time. On March 19, 1944, Germany occupied Hungary in Operation Margareta. Adolf Eichmann arrived in Budapest soon after with a small SS team. He quickly organized the deportation process with help from Hungarian authorities and gendarmes. Ghettos were set up across the countryside in April 1944. Jews were forced from their homes and concentrated into collection points. Deportations to Auschwitz began in mid-May 1944. Between May 15th and July 9th, about 437,000 Hungarian Jews were transported to Auschwitz. That number comes from German transport records and post-war investigations. On some days, 4 trains arrived. Each train carried between 2,000 and 3,000 people packed into cattle cars. Höss had left his post as Commandant of Auschwitz in late 1943 and had been replaced by Arthur Liebehenschel. But because of the scale of the Hungarian operation, Himmler ordered Höss to return in May 1944 to supervise the extermination process. His experience was needed to manage the massive influx. By the end of summer 1944, hundreds of thousands of Hungarian Jews had been murdered. The Hungarian operation became one of the fastest and largest deportation actions of the entire Holocaust. Auschwitz was operating at its highest killing capacity. But outside the camp, Germany was losing the war. By January 1945, the Soviet Red Army was advancing rapidly through Poland. Front lines were collapsing. German forces were retreating. Auschwitz was now dangerously close to Soviet positions. On January 17th, the SS began evacuating the camp. Around 56,000 prisoners were forced to march west toward Germany in freezing temperatures. These marches later became known as death marches. Prisoners walked for days with little food. Anyone who fell behind was shot. Thousands died from exhaustion, exposure, or execution. The SS also tried to destroy evidence. Documents were burned. Crematoria 2 and 3 were blown up on January 20th. Warehouses containing stolen goods were set on fire. The goal was to hide the scale of the crimes. On January 27th, Soviet soldiers from the 60th Army of the 1st Ukrainian Front entered Auschwitz. They found about 7,000 prisoners left behind, most too sick to walk. They also discovered warehouses filled with shoes, eyeglasses, suitcases, and human hair. The scale of what had happened became clear. Höss was not there. He had already fled under orders from Himmler. He was told to disappear and avoid capture. Using false identity papers, he took the name Franz Lang and worked as a farm laborer near Flensburg in northern Germany. He grew a beard and tried to blend in. For months he avoided arrest. But Allied forces were actively searching for former SS leaders. His wife, Hedwig Höss, was located by British investigators. Under threat of deportation and legal consequences, she revealed his hiding place. On March 11, 1946, British military police arrested him near Flensburg. During interrogation, he was beaten and initially denied his identity. Eventually, he confessed to being Rudolf Höss. Soon after, he was brought to Nuremberg to testify at the International Military Tribunal. In April 1946, he appeared as a defense witness for Ernst Klattenbrunner, the head of the Reich Main Security Office after Reinhard Heydrich's death. What shocked many people in the courtroom was not just what Höss said, but how he said it. He spoke calmly. He explained how Auschwitz functioned. Later in 1946, he was extradited to Poland, where most of his crimes had taken place. The Polish government wanted him tried on the soil where Auschwitz stood. He was transferred to Krakow and held in Montelupik prison while awaiting trial. His trial began on March 11, 1947, exactly 1 year after his capture. It took place before the Supreme National Tribunal in Warsaw. This was the same court that had tried other major Nazi officials in Poland. Höss was charged with crimes against humanity, genocide, and responsibility for the systematic murder and mistreatment of prisoners between May 1940 and January 1945. On April 2, 1947, the tribunal sentenced him to death by hanging. On April 16th, he was taken back to Auschwitz. A wooden gallows had been built near Crematorium 1 at Auschwitz 1, not far from the former commandant's office. This was the same camp where he had once walked freely, inspected prisoners, and supervised executions. He was 45 years old. The execution was carried out by Polish authorities. There was no large public crowd. It was done formally and quietly. Höss was led to the gallows, and the sentence was carried out. His body was buried in an unmarked grave. He had turned mass murder into a system that ran on schedules, paperwork, and routine. And that cold, organized approach to death is why his name still stands as one of the darkest in history.